It was a crisp autumn morning in the small town of Brooksville. The leaves had just begun to turn, painting the town in hues of amber and crimson, the kind of morning where the air was fresh, carrying a sense of hope and promise. But for Mrs. Helen Carter, a devoted high school history teacher, that morning would bring something she never expected. On a routine virtual class via Google Meet, Mrs. Carter's attention was suddenly caught by a familiar face among the sea of students' tiles. Her heart skipped a beat. It couldn't be. But there she was, Emma Reynolds, a face she hadn't seen in 20 years. Emma Reynolds, once the shining star of Brooksville High, was the embodiment of potential. An exceptional student, she was known for her inquisitive mind and kind heart. Her dreams were as bright as her smile, a future filled with endless possibilities and aspirations to become an environmental scientist. Emma was the girl everyone believed would go on to change the world. But on a chilly November night in 2003, those dreams were abruptly halted. Emma vanished without a trace. It was as if the earth had swallowed her whole. Her disappearance left an indelible scar on the town and a void in the hearts of those who knew her. The day she disappeared was like any other. Emma had attended school, where she was last seen leaving the library after her afternoon study group. She planned to meet her best friend, Sarah, at the local coffee shop to discuss their upcoming science project. When Emma didn't show up, Sarah assumed she got caught up in something else. But as hours turned into a restless night, concern began to creep in. Emma's parents, Mark and Diane Reynolds, were filled with anxiety when they realized their daughter had not returned home. As the clock ticked past midnight, panic set in. Diane's trembling hands dialed 911, her voice barely a whisper, as she reported her daughter missing. "She's never done anything like this before," she insisted, desperation lacing her words. Brooksville police launched a search, but as days turned into weeks, hope began to dwindle. The investigation was marred by missteps, a small department overwhelmed by the complexity of such a case. Leads fizzled out, and Emma's disappearance became another unsolved mystery in the annals of small-town lore. For 2 decades, the Reynolds family endured the agony of not knowing, clinging to memories, and the faint hope that Emma might one day walk through their front door. Brooksville, too, learned to live with the shadow of the unsolved case, the townsfolk whispering stories of what might have happened to the girl who was destined for greatness. And now, Mrs. Carter sat frozen, heart pounding, staring at the screen. How could this be? Was it a cruel trick of the mind or a ghost from the past? With shaky hands, she ended the call and reached for her phone, dialing the number she hadn't called in years, the Brooksville Police Department. Her voice trembled as she said, "I think I've just seen Emma Reynolds." The voice on the other end of the line was calm, but Mrs. Carter could hear the underlying skepticism. "Ma'am, could you repeat that?" the officer asked, trying to process the implications of her statement. Mrs. Carter took a deep breath, her words more deliberate this time. "I'm sure of it. The girl on my screen, she looked just like Emma Reynolds. She had the same eyes, the same smile. It was her." The Brooksville Police Department, now more seasoned and with resources that had been lacking 2 decades prior, responded with a cautious urgency. Within the hour, Detective Mike Harris, a seasoned investigator who had taken a personal interest in cold cases, was at Mrs. Carter's doorstep. His eyes, sharp and probing, searched her face for any hint of doubt or uncertainty. "Mrs. Carter," he began, his voice steady, "I need you to tell me everything about what you saw." She recounted the Google Meet session, describing how the girl had appeared briefly on a shared video feed before disappearing. Detective Harris listened intently, scribbling notes, his mind racing with possibilities. Meanwhile, back at the Reynolds household, the phone rang shrilly, cutting through the heavy silence that had settled over the years. Diane answered, her heart pounding in her chest. "Mrs. Reynolds," Detective Harris said gently, "we have a potential lead on Emma." The words hung in the air like a lifeline. Mark and Diane clung to each other, a mix of hope and fear in their eyes. This was what they had prayed for, yet the possibility of being thrown back into the turmoil of the past was terrifying. As the first 48 hours unfolded, the Brooksville Police Department launched a renewed investigation with fervor. Officers canvassed the neighborhood, revisiting old witnesses and seeking new ones. Sarah, Emma's best friend from school, now a teacher herself, was one of the first to be questioned. Her memories were vivid, tinged with guilt over not insisting that something was wrong sooner. "I remember waiting at the coffee shop, thinking she'd just gotten caught up with something," Sarah explained, her voice tinged with regret. "But the more I think about it, the more I realize that day felt off. I just didn't know what to make of it at the time." The investigation quickly highlighted the early mistakes that plagued the original case. Key witnesses had not been thoroughly questioned. Crucial evidence, like Emma's belongings, had not been properly catalogued. Detective Harris made it his mission to rectify these oversights, driven by the weight of 2 decades of inaction. One of the early missteps was the failure to secure surveillance footage from the library and the coffee shop. The realization that such potentially vital evidence had been lost was a bitter pill for the department, but it only fueled their determination to look at new angles. As the investigation ramped up, whispers spread through Brooksville. The town was abuzz with speculation and renewed interest in the case that had once defined their community. Old rumors resurfaced and new theories began to form. Among them was the unsettling prospect that someone in the town might have known more than they let on. The first 48 hours were a whirlwind of activity and emotion, leaving the Reynolds family oscillating between hope and despair. As the investigation dug deeper, one question loomed large. If Emma had been seen, where was she now, and who was responsible for her disappearance all those years ago? As the sun set on the second day, Detective Harris received a call that would change the course of the investigation. A former employee from the coffee shop, where Emma was supposed to meet Sarah, had come forward, claiming to remember an unusual encounter on the day of Emma's disappearance. The memory was vague, clouded by time, but it was enough to warrant further investigation. With this new lead, the case was poised to take a dramatic turn. Yet the question remained, was this the breakthrough they needed, or just another dead end in a trail gone cold? Detective Harris listened intently as the former employee, now in her late 40s, recounted her memory. Her voice trembled slightly, a mix of nerves and the weight of dredging up a long-buried recollection. She remembered a man, middle-aged, sitting alone near the back of the coffee shop on that fateful afternoon. He was unremarkable at first glance, but there was something about his demeanor that felt out of place. He seemed overly interested in the comings and goings of the patrons, particularly Emma. His eyes followed her as she walked in, a subtle yet unsettling focus. The detective pressed for details, any distinguishing features. The woman paused, searching her mind. A faded baseball cap, she finally recalled, and a jacket that seemed a size too big. It wasn't much, but it was more than they'd had before. Harris thanked her, his mind racing with possibilities. Meanwhile, the Reynolds family was grappling with the resurgence of media attention. Reporters camped outside their home, eager for any scrap of news. Emma's mother, Susan, oscillated between anger and exhaustion, her hope rekindled, yet tempered by years of disappointment. Her husband, Tom, tried to shield the family from the chaos, but it was a futile effort. The past had come knocking, and its presence was unyielding. As the investigation unfolded, the town's whispers grew louder. Speculation about the mysterious man in the coffee shop spread like wildfire, with residents digging into their own memories. Some recalled seeing him at the local diner. Others thought they'd spotted him at the library. Each sighting painted a picture of a man who blended into the background, yet left a lasting impression. Detective Harris knew that time was of the essence. The first 48 hours were crucial, and the pressure to act swiftly weighed heavily on him. He assembled a team to re-interview old witnesses, hoping to jog memories that might have been dismissed or forgotten. The police combed through records, looking for anyone who matched the vague description of the man in the baseball cap. But amidst the frenzy, a critical error from the past loomed large. The original investigation had failed to fully explore Emma's relationships. Her friends were questioned, but their statements were brief, lacking depth or follow-up. Harris aimed to rectify this by speaking directly with Sarah, Emma's best friend at the time. Sarah, now a mother herself, welcomed the chance to revisit her memories. She revealed details that had seemed inconsequential back then. Emma had recently confided in her about feeling watched, a sensation she couldn't shake. It was a revelation that sent chills down Harris's spine. What if, he wondered, the man in the coffee shop had been more than just a fleeting presence? As day 3 dawned, the investigation teetered on the edge of a breakthrough. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the picture they formed was still incomplete. The town, the family, the detectives, all were holding their breath, waiting for the moment when the past would finally surrender its secrets. Yet, one question continued to haunt them. Was the man in the baseball cap the key to finding Emma, or a ghost from a time that had already slipped away? Detective Harris stood in the dim light of the precinct, the grey morning filtering through the blinds like a veil over the uncertainty that draped the room. He knew that in the first 48 hours of a case, every decision, every step, could mean the difference between resolution and a lifetime of unanswered questions. As he shuffled through the old case files, he couldn't shake the feeling that something crucial had been overlooked. The department buzzed with activity as officers prepared to fan out across the town. Harris instructed his team to revisit each location where the man in the baseball cap had possibly been sighted. He emphasized the need to track down anyone who might have seen him in the days leading up to Emma's disappearance. But Harris also knew they couldn't rely solely on the past. New eyes might see what others had missed. As the team dispersed, Harris made his way to the family home, where Emma's mother sat clutching a faded photograph of her daughter. Her eyes, once vibrant, were now clouded with decades of sorrow. She recounted the last day she saw Emma, her voice breaking as she described the farewell that had seemed so ordinary at the time. Emma had left for school with a smile, promising to be home by dinner. She never arrived. Neighbors recalled seeing Emma walking alone, her usual route taking her past the library and through the park. But that day, something was different. An elderly man who'd been tending his garden remembered a car that idled at the corner longer than seemed necessary, a detail he'd dismissed until now. It was a nondescript sedan, but the memory of its driver was foggy, obscured by time, and his own reluctance to believe that anything sinister lurked in their quiet town. Back at the station, the urgency of the first 48 hours was palpable. Officers combed through surveillance footage from nearby businesses, hoping to catch a glimpse of Emma or the mysterious car. Yet in their haste, a critical error from the past reared its head. The original investigation had failed to secure key footage from a bank on the corner. The tapes had been recorded over, their contents lost forever. Despite the setback, Harris pressed on, determined to piece together the fragmented memories and half-glimpsed sightings. He called in additional resources, bringing in a profiler to help construct a psychological portrait of the man in the baseball cap. Who was he? What did he want? And why had he vanished so completely? Meanwhile, Sarah, Emma's best friend, continued to provide insights that were both haunting and revealing. She recounted how Emma had once mentioned a stranger asking for directions, his eyes lingering on her a moment too long. It was a fleeting encounter, but one that now took on a chilling significance. Could this have been the same man, the one who seemed to slip in and out of focus like a shadow? As dusk settled over the town, the weight of the first 48 hours pressed heavily on them all. The family remained in a state of suspended grief, teetering between hope and despair. The detectives pressed on, knowing that the clock was ticking, each second whispering the possibility of what could have been missed. And yet, amidst the uncertainty, a new lead emerged. A call from a woman who claimed to have seen the man in the baseball cap recently, not in the past, but just weeks ago. Her voice trembled with urgency, insisting that she'd seen him at a rest stop off the interstate, his eyes scanning the crowd as if searching for something, or someone. The possibility of a new sighting reignited the investigation, and the team prepared to follow this fresh trail. But as they did, one question loomed larger than ever. Was this truly a break in the case, or merely another phantom from the past, destined to elude them once more? The woman's call had set the team into motion, and within hours they were on the road, heading toward the rest stop she described. The air inside the van was thick with tension, each investigator silently contemplating the weight of the opportunity before them. Could this be the lead that finally brings Emma home? As they approached the rest stop, they focused on the details she provided. An older model, blue sedan parked under a flickering streetlight, the man in a baseball cap moving with a casual yet deliberate air. However, upon arrival, the scene was frustratingly mundane. Vehicles came and went, families bustled to and from the convenience store, and the man in question was nowhere to be seen. The team spread out, questioning employees and patrons, but the responses were as varied as they were vague. Some remembered seeing a man matching the description, while others shook their heads, preoccupied with their own travels. The lead, once promising, now seemed to slip through their fingers like sand. Back at the station, the detectives regrouped, piecing together what little information they had. Harris leaned over the table, frustration etched into his features. The profiler, an experienced yet empathetic figure, spoke softly, urging patience and persistence. It's not uncommon for sightings to be misidentified, she reminded them, but every thread could potentially weave into the larger tapestry of the case. In the community, whispers began to circulate. Theories emerged, some grounded in concern, others in speculation. A local man, known for his eccentric behavior, found himself at the center of unwanted attention. His reclusive lifestyle and fondness for solitude painted him as an outsider, a convenient scapegoat for a town desperate for closure. Yet upon investigation, his alibi was solid, his innocence undisputed. The pressure mounted as days turned into weeks. The initial fervor of the investigation began to wane, the trail growing colder with each passing moment. A sense of helplessness loomed over the team, and the case threatened to join the ranks of countless others, relegated to dusty shelves and forgotten files. For Emma's family, the silence was suffocating. They clung to the hope that somewhere, someone knew something, an elusive piece of the puzzle that could break the case wide open. Sarah, steadfast in her support, visited regularly, her presence a constant reminder of the bond she and Emma shared. Then, just as hope seemed to fade, a letter arrived at the police station, postmarked from a nearby town. Its contents were cryptic, a series of numbers and letters that seemed random, but carried an unmistakable air of significance. Was it a taunt from the perpetrator, a breadcrumb leading to the truth, or simply another dead end? The team gathered, their determination reignited. They had no choice but to decode the message and follow wherever it might lead. The letter, its cryptic message a puzzle, lay open on the table as the detectives scrutinized every line, every curve of the handwritten characters. Harris, tapping his pen against the edge of the table, eyed the jumble of numbers and letters, seeking patterns where none seemed to exist. The profiler suggested they might be coordinates or a code, something deliberately obscured to challenge their resolve. As they worked to decipher the enigma, whispers in the community evolved into something more insidious. Rumors spread like wildfire, each iteration more elaborate than the last. A former teacher at the high school, once admired for his dedication, now found himself the subject of suspicion. He was seen as too invested in his students' lives, and in the absence of evidence, gossip twisted his mentorship into something darker. Harris and his team, aware of the mounting pressure, interviewed the teacher. His demeanor was calm, his responses measured. He recounted his years of service and his genuine concern for his students, yet the weight of the community's judgment hung heavily in the air. Despite a thorough investigation, no evidence linked him to Emma's disappearance. His reputation, however, lay in tatters, a casualty of the town's desperation. The case file grew thicker, not with answers but with theories and dead ends. Each day that passed without a breakthrough felt like sand slipping through their fingers, mirroring the sense of loss that had settled over Emma's family. Sarah, ever vigilant, kept the memory of her friend alive, organizing vigils and speaking with anyone who might have seen or heard something. Meanwhile, the detectives returned to the cryptic letter, enlisting the help of a cryptanalyst from the state. Together, they dissected each component, their frustration palpable as potential solutions dissolved into nothingness. Yet, amidst their struggle, the profiler pointed out a pattern, a repetition of certain numbers and letters that suggested a name, a place, or perhaps a date significant to the case. The breakthrough was as elusive as it was invigorating. While the investigation had hit a wall, the letter offered a glimmer of hope, a promise that the truth lay just beyond their grasp. As the team redoubled their efforts, the profiler reminded them that sometimes the most tangled puzzles required a shift in perspective. Outside the confines of the investigation, the community's unease simmered. The whispers of the past began to merge with the present, casting shadows over those who had once felt safe. The case, far from forgotten, lingered in the minds of all who had known Emma, her absence a wound that refused to heal. In the silence of the station, the team knew they were at a crossroads. The letter, enigmatic as it was, beckoned them forward, but with every step, they risked being led deeper into the labyrinth. Would they find Emma, or only more questions? As they pondered their next move, a call came in from a neighboring precinct. A lead, tenuous but promising, had surfaced. A woman claiming to have seen Emma, or someone resembling her, in a town not far from where the letter had been postmarked. The air thickened with anticipation. Could this be the breakthrough they needed, or another mirage in a desert of uncertainty? The detectives prepared to follow the lead, the weight of their task pressing heavily upon them. With the community watching and Emma's family holding their breath, the stakes had never been higher. The detectives' car sped down the highway, the rhythmic thumping of the tires on the asphalt underscoring the urgency of their mission. As they approached the town, a sense of familiar apprehension settled over them, a reminder of the many dead ends they had encountered over the years. The call had been vague, the details sparse, but the possibility, however slim, kept their determination burning bright. Once they arrived, they met with the woman who claimed to have seen Emma. Her eyes were wide with the burden of what she might have witnessed. Her story unfolded with hesitance, each word carefully chosen, as though they were stepping stones across an uncertain stream. She described a woman, seen only briefly at a local grocery store, her face partially obscured by a hat and sunglasses. Yet, something about her struck a chord, a fleeting sense of familiarity that had ignited a spark of recognition. Despite the woman's conviction, the detectives couldn't ignore the possibility of mistaken identity. They canvassed the area, seeking surveillance footage, questioning store employees, and tracking down any potential witnesses. Each avenue seemed promising at first, but quickly fizzled into uncertainty. The footage was grainy, the angles poor, and the hat and sunglasses disguise was all too common. Back in the precinct, the detectives gathered around a whiteboard marked with potential leads and suspects. They revisited every name, every face that had been scrutinized and then dismissed over the years. The community's whispers had evolved into a cacophony of speculation, each rumor more convoluted than the last. Theories ranged from the plausible to the fantastical, each one threading through the fabric of the town's collective consciousness. In the midst of this chaos, attention turned to a group of men who had been frequent attendees at the local bar during the time of Emma's disappearance. Their names had surfaced amidst the chatter, each one carrying a shadow of suspicion. The detectives, desperate for any lead, decided to interview them once more. The men were defensive, their alibis rehearsed and tired from years of recounting them. Yet, one detail stood out, a shared connection to a nearby abandoned property, rumored to be a haven for those who wished to remain unseen. The detectives obtained a warrant to search the property, their hope rekindled by the prospect of unearthing something tangible. As they approached the dilapidated structure, the air grew still, the silence punctuated only by the rustling of leaves. Inside, they found evidence of recent habitation, discarded food wrappers, remnants of a makeshift bed, and scrawled notes that hinted at someone living in the shadows. Despite these promising signs, the investigation hit a wall once more. The notes were cryptic, the handwriting unsteady and unfamiliar. They revealed nothing about Emma's fate, only deepening the mystery. The property, once a beacon of hope, now stood as a monument to their frustration. As the days turned into weeks, the case began to lose momentum. Leads dried up and the community's interest waned, the whispers growing faint. Emma's family, their hope renewed and dashed in equal measure, found themselves caught in a relentless cycle of grief and anticipation. Yet, even as the investigation seemed to stall, a quiet determination persisted among the detectives. They refused to let Emma's story fade into obscurity, to become just another file gathering dust in the archives of unsolved cases. The truth, elusive and tantalizing, was out there, waiting to be uncovered. And in the shadows, the real killer watched, their secret still intact, their mask of normalcy unbroken. The years drifted by, each one stretching into the next, a relentless tide that threatened to erode the very memory of Emma's existence. Her family, once vibrant and full of life, now bore the weary marks of time and unresolved loss. Emma's mother, her eyes a constant well of unshed tears, clung to the hope that her daughter would one day walk through the front door, the past 2 decades nothing more than a cruel dream. Emma's father, a man of few words, poured his pain into action. He took it upon himself to continue the investigation, tirelessly combing through old notes, revisiting every detail with a fresh perspective. He kept a corner of their cluttered garage dedicated to Emma, newspaper clippings, photographs, maps with pins marking every potential lead. It was his shrine to the daughter he refused to let go of. The community, once galvanized by the tragedy, had slowly moved on. New generations grew up with only a vague notion of Emma's disappearance, her story reduced to a cautionary tale shared in hushed tones. The annual vigil held on the anniversary of her vanishing dwindled in numbers, the flickering candles casting long shadows that danced with memories of what once was. For the detectives, the case file remained open, a constant reminder of their failure to deliver closure. They would occasionally revisit the case, driven by a nagging feeling that they had missed something crucial. Each time they were met with the same dead ends, the same echoes of despair. Emma's younger brother, just a child when she disappeared, had grown into a man marked by the shadow of his sister's absence. He carried her memory with him, a silent companion that fueled his determination to become a lawyer. He would fight for justice, not just for Emma, but for all those who had been silenced. Despite the long silence, whispers of hope occasionally surfaced, like glimmers of light in a darkened room. Rumors of sightings, vague and unsubstantiated, would reach Emma's family, igniting a brief spark of optimism. But as quickly as they came, they would fade, leaving behind the cold reality of an unsolved mystery. In the quiet of their home, Emma's parents often found solace in each other's company, their bond strengthened by shared grief. They spoke of their daughter with reverence, recounting stories from her childhood, her laughter a distant echo in their minds. They held on to the belief that somewhere, somehow, Emma was alive, waiting for the moment she could come back to them. Through the years, one constant remained: the killer hiding in plain sight, living among them with the ease of a practiced facade. They watched as the community moved on, as the family they had torn apart struggled to piece together a semblance of normalcy. And as time wore on, their confidence grew, believing their secret would remain undiscovered. But beneath the surface, the tides were shifting. Unbeknownst to all, a breakthrough was on the horizon, one that would crack open the case and reveal the truth that had eluded them for so long. The silence, once oppressive and unyielding, was about to be shattered in ways no one could have anticipated. For years, the town of Maplewood seemed frozen in time, a quaint backdrop to a tragedy that refused to fade. Emma's disappearance had left an indelible mark, yet as the seasons turned, the case grew colder, layers of dust settling over once urgent files. The community, at first united in shock and sympathy, gradually resumed its rhythms, the memory of Emma's bright smile relegated to whispers and the occasional candlelight vigil. Emma's family, however, lived in a different reality. To them, time was not a healer, but a relentless force, pressing ever forward while they remained anchored in the past. Her parents, steadfast in their resolve, kept her bedroom untouched, a shrine to the daughter they refused to give up on. Every holiday, every birthday, they left a place for Emma at the table, a silent testament to their enduring hope. Her brother, now steeped in the law, turned his analytical mind towards the case, poring over the minutiae of police reports and witness statements. He retraced every footstep, re-interviewed neighbors, and delved into the archives of local newspapers, seeking any overlooked detail. He had vowed not just to understand what happened to Emma, but to ensure that no other family would endure such a fate. His dedication was unwavering, yet the answers remained elusive, just out of reach. Around them, life continued. New families moved into the neighborhood, children played in the parks, and the annual fair brought bursts of color and laughter to the town square. Yet, beneath the surface, a palpable tension lingered, a silent acknowledgement of the unsolved mystery that lay beneath their feet. The local authorities, faced with dwindling leads and public interest, gradually shifted their focus to more immediate concerns. For them, Emma's case was a haunting reminder of their limitations, a ghost that lingered in the corners of their precinct. They had no choice but to allocate resources to newer crimes, leaving Emma's file in the archives, a chapter they feared might never close. But in the quiet moments when dusk settled over the town and the streets grew still, Emma's presence was felt most keenly. Her absence echoed in the places she once loved, the library where she spent hours lost in stories, the diner where her laughter mingled with the clink of coffee cups, the school where her potential once sparkled brightly. For the killer, the years had been a test of endurance, each day a gamble with fate. They watched the family's tireless efforts with a mix of disdain and admiration, confident in their ability to remain unseen. The passage of time had bolstered their arrogance, each unremarkable day a testament to their success in evading justice. Yet, unbeknownst to them, the sands were shifting. Deep within the digital recesses of the internet, a community of amateur sleuths had taken an interest in Emma's case. Fueled by curiosity and a sense of justice, they dissected every available detail, drawing connections and uncovering anomalies long buried in the official narrative. Their voices, once scattered and faint, were beginning to coalesce into a force that could not be ignored. And as the family held vigil in their hearts, as the town went about its daily routines, a storm was brewing. The silence that had enshrouded Emma's case for so long was about to be shattered, its echoes to reverberate far beyond the borders of Maplewood. What was once hidden was inching towards the light, and the truth, long suppressed, was on the verge of erupting into the open. Years slipped by like pages in a forgotten book, yet for the Reynolds family time stood still. Emma's absence was a void that nothing could fill, a shadow that stretched across their lives, casting even the brightest moments in a pall of sorrow. Her room remained untouched, a shrine to the girl they lost, filled with whispers of the past. Emma's mother, Margaret, became a fixture at the local library, combing through articles on unsolved cases, penning letters to investigative journalists, and reaching out to anyone who would listen. Her father, Tom, took a different path, pouring his grief into action. He organized community searches and vigils, determined to keep Emma's memory alive in Maplewood's collective consciousness. Yet as the years dragged on, enthusiasm waned, the search parties dwindled, and the vigils became sparsely attended. Maplewood itself moved on as towns do. New families moved in, unaware of the quiet tragedy that had once gripped their streets. Children grew up, went away to college, and returned with families of their own. The once vibrant posters of Emma that lined the town's notice boards faded and peeled, becoming ghostly reminders of a story many had reluctantly accepted as unsolvable. But Margaret and Tom refused to let go. In the late hours of the night, they would sit together reviewing the same files, the same photos, hoping for a spark of insight. Margaret started a blog, pouring her heart into posts that chronicled Emma's life, her disappearance, and the family's relentless search for answers. It was there that she connected with an online community, people from all corners of the world who offered support, shared theories, and reignited the flame of hope. Among them was a retired detective named John Miller, whose interest in cold cases had become a hobby in his twilight years. He reached out to Margaret, drawn by the peculiarities of Emma's case and the gaps in the official narrative. Together, they began to piece together a puzzle that had eluded the authorities. John's expertise brought new insights, pointing to inconsistencies that had been overlooked. He discovered a misfiled police report from an eyewitness who had seen a suspicious vehicle near the school on the day Emma disappeared, a piece of evidence that had never been followed up. This revelation sent ripples through the online community, energizing the amateur sleuths who had taken up Emma's cause. Meanwhile, the person who had orchestrated Emma's disappearance watched from the shadows, their confidence slowly eroding. They had built a life on the assumption of impunity, but the whispers of renewed interest in the case gnawed at their carefully constructed facade. The years of silence had emboldened them, but now each day seemed more precarious than the last. As the digital detectives dug deeper, they uncovered more discrepancies, a timeline that didn't quite fit, an alibi that seemed too convenient. Emma's story began to take on a life of its own, spreading across forums and social media, capturing the imagination of those who refused to let her be forgotten. And then, on a cold December morning, Margaret received an email from a young woman in a neighboring state who claimed to have seen Emma. This woman had stumbled upon a blog post detailing the case and was struck by a memory that refused to fade. A chance encounter at a small-town fair 2 years prior, a girl with hauntingly familiar eyes. The message was a crack in the wall of silence that had surrounded Emma's disappearance. It was a lead, a lifeline, something tangible to grasp onto amidst the sea of uncertainty. As Margaret shared the news with Tom, hope flickered to life once more. The family, the town, and even the killer felt the shift, a change in the winds that hinted at the possibility of resolution and justice. The past, once buried, was clawing its way to the surface, and the truth, relentless and unstoppable, was poised to emerge from the shadows. As Margaret and Tom clung to this newfound hope, the town buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The email, with its promise of a possible sighting, reignited the community's determination to find Emma. Online groups swelled with new members, each eager to contribute, each possessed by a singular desire to unravel the mystery that had haunted them for 2 decades. It was amidst this resurgence of energy that Detective Sarah Carter, a seasoned investigator with a reputation for solving cold cases, found herself drawn into the fray. Having recently transferred to the region, she had heard whispers of Emma's case and decided to review the files. What she found intrigued her, a tapestry woven with missed opportunities and overlooked details. Emma's disappearance was a puzzle, and Sarah had always loved puzzles. Her first move was to contact Margaret and Tom to hear from them directly about the recent lead. Sitting across from them in a small sunlit kitchen, she listened intently as they recounted the email and the woman's recollection of the small-town fair. Their voices carried the weight of years spent in limbo, their eyes a mix of hope and exhaustion. Sarah assured them she would personally look into the lead and promised to re-examine every scrap of evidence with fresh eyes. Her commitment was a balm to their weary spirits, a sign that they were no longer alone in their quest for answers. As Sarah delved deeper into the case files, she discovered something that had been gathering dust for far too long. A fragment of DNA found on Emma's backpack, a piece of evidence that had been inconclusive with old technology. But now, with advancements in genetic genealogy, Sarah saw an opportunity. This cutting-edge method had recently made headlines for solving cases long thought unsolvable. She knew it could be the breakthrough needed to bring Emma home. With the family's consent, Sarah sent the DNA sample to a specialized lab, its scientists eager to apply the latest techniques to this decades-old mystery. The waiting was excruciating, but each day brought them closer to a potential breakthrough. In the meantime, Sarah revisited the eyewitness account of the suspicious vehicle. She tracked down the original witness, a man named Frank, who had since moved out of town. Sitting in his living room, Sarah listened as he described the faded memory of a dark sedan lingering near the school on that fateful day. It was a detail that had been dismissed too easily, a thread left dangling. Frank's account, combined with the forensic efforts underway, painted a picture that was slowly coming into focus. The pieces began to align in Sarah's mind, forming a narrative that hinted at a conspiracy, a cover-up, or perhaps a tragic series of events that had spiraled out of control. As she drove back to the station, her mind buzzed with possibilities. The DNA results were expected soon, and Sarah could feel the tension in the air, a collective holding of breath as they awaited what could be the key to unlocking the truth. Back at the lab, the scientists worked diligently, their computers humming as algorithms compared genetic markers against vast databases. Each match brought them closer, and the anticipation was electric. And then, one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, an alert sounded, a partial match, a glimmer of hope. The news reached Sarah quickly, and she raced to the lab, her heart pounding with the promise of revelation. Would this lead them to Emma, or perhaps to the person who had orchestrated her disappearance? The truth, long obscured, was teetering on the edge of discovery. As Sarah stared at the data on the screen, she knew they were closer than ever to solving the mystery that had haunted so many for so long. But the next steps were crucial, and the path ahead was fraught with peril. As Sarah stood in the dimly lit lab, the glow from the computer screen illuminated her determined expression. The partial DNA match was a beacon of hope in the otherwise murky waters of this decades-old mystery. The lab technician, a seasoned veteran named Tom, pointed to the screen with a look of cautious optimism. "We've got something here, Sarah," Tom said, his voice steady but filled with the weight of significance. "The partial match connects to a distant relative on a public genealogy site. It might not be the final piece, but it's a start." Sarah nodded, her mind already spinning with the implications. This could lead us to a family member, someone who knew Emma, or perhaps even the person who took her. Tom leaned back, crossing his arms thoughtfully. "We need to approach this carefully. There's a lot of groundwork to cover, but we have a direction now." The breakthrough was significant, yet it demanded cautious exploration. They needed to trace the family tree, identify connections, and most importantly, avoid alerting anyone who might be implicated. As Sarah prepared to leave the lab, her phone buzzed with an incoming call. It was Detective Mark Jensen, a fresh face in the department, known for his tenacity and fresh perspectives on cold cases. "Sarah, I heard the news." Mark's voice crackled through the line, tinged with excitement. "I think we should meet. There's something else you need to see." Intrigued, Sarah agreed, and they arranged to meet at a small cafe near the station. As she walked in, the aroma of coffee mingled with the chatter of patrons, creating a comforting backdrop for what was about to unfold. Mark was already seated at a corner table, a laptop open in front of him. He gestured for her to join him, and without preamble he launched into his findings. "I've been digging into old records, looking at any anomalies around the time of Emma's disappearance," Mark explained, his eyes alight with discovery. "And I found something odd, a series of payments made to a private investigator by an anonymous client right around the time Emma vanished." Sarah leaned in closer, her interest piqued. "And you think this is connected?" "Possibly. The payment stopped abruptly a few months after Emma went missing. It's as if someone was trying to track her or perhaps cover their tracks." The pieces were beginning to fit together, creating a narrative that was both complex and chilling. A new detective's fresh eyes had uncovered a trail that had long gone cold, and with the new genetic evidence, they were inching ever closer to the truth. "We need to find out who hired that investigator and why," Sarah said, determination lacing her voice. "This could be the lead we've been waiting for." As they mapped out their next moves, a sense of urgency filled the air. The path was clearer now, but fraught with potential danger. Someone had been watching, waiting, and perhaps even manipulating events from the shadows. The revelation of the mysterious payments added a layer of intrigue, suggesting a conspiracy that reached deeper than anyone had imagined. With the DNA match and the financial trail, the possibility of exposing the truth felt tantalizingly close. The questions hung between them, heavy and insistent. Who was behind Emma's disappearance, and how far would they go to keep the past buried? The answers lay just ahead, and with each step, the shadows of the past grew a little less daunting. But time was of the essence, and Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. The room was filled with a tense but hopeful energy as Sarah and Mark continued their discussion. The discovery of the payments had opened a door, but they needed more than just a financial trail to unravel the mystery behind Emma's disappearance. A few days later, in a dimly lit office lined with case files, Detective Alex Martinez, a seasoned investigator known for his tenacity and fresh perspectives, sat down with Sarah and Mark. His reputation for solving cold cases preceded him, and he was determined to see this one through. "I've reviewed the information you sent," Alex began, his voice steady and measured. "And there's something else we can use. A new forensic technology, genetic genealogy. It's been revolutionizing how we approach cold cases." Sarah and Mark exchanged a hopeful glance. This was the breakthrough they had been waiting for. "Genetic genealogy?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. "How does it work?" Alex explained. "We take DNA evidence collected from the original crime scene and compare it to databases of genetic information. It allows us to identify relatives of the person the DNA belongs to, which can lead us directly to our suspect." Mark nodded, the pieces of the puzzle starting to align in his mind. "And we have Emma's DNA from her personal items, right?" "Exactly," Alex confirmed. "We can use that to find out if there are any matches in the system. It might give us a lead on who was connected to her disappearance." The room was silent for a moment, as the weight of this potential breakthrough settled over them. It was as if a new light had pierced through the darkness, offering a glimmer of hope they so desperately needed. As they prepared the necessary paperwork to access the genetic databases, Sarah couldn't help but feel a surge of anticipation. The thought of being one step closer to finding Emma, or at least understanding what had happened to her, was invigorating. Yet, with every step forward, there was also a lingering fear. The fear of what they might uncover and the implications it could have for everyone involved. But there was no turning back now. The search for truth had become a relentless pursuit, driven by love, determination, and the unyielding need for closure. As the days passed, the anticipation grew. They waited anxiously for the results from the genetic genealogy analysis, each day feeling like an eternity. The process was complex and required meticulous attention to detail, but Alex assured them it was their best chance at finding answers. Then, one afternoon, Sarah received a call from Alex. His voice was filled with an urgency that sent a chill down her spine. "We've got something," he said, his words clipped and precise. "A match. A close relative of someone in the database. We need to meet immediately." Sarah's heart raced as she hurried to the meeting place, her mind a whirlwind of possibilities and fears. This could be the moment they had all been waiting for, the key to unraveling the tangled web of secrets that had kept Emma hidden for so long. The anticipation was electric, the stakes higher than ever. As she approached the office, she knew that whatever lay ahead, it would change everything. The truth was within reach, and with it, the chance to finally bring Emma home. Sarah pushed open the door to the small conference room, her breath catching in her throat. The air was thick with tension, the kind that comes with the weight of long-held secrets on the verge of being revealed. Alex was already there, his laptop open, a series of complex DNA matches displayed on the screen. He gestured for Sarah to sit, his eyes focused and intense. "This," he began, pointing to the screen, "is the breakthrough we've been hoping for. We've identified a close familial match, someone directly connected to Emma." Sarah leaned forward, her eyes scanning the data. "Who is it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "An uncle," Alex replied, his finger tracing a line on the screen. "Lives just a few towns over. It seems he never knew Emma existed, but his DNA was in the database due to a separate investigation." The revelation hung in the air, heavy with implications. Sarah's mind raced with possibilities. An uncle, a relative who might hold the missing piece of the puzzle, the connection that could finally lead them to Emma. "We need to approach this delicately," Alex continued, breaking the silence. "If this man is unaware of Emma, we can't just barge in and overwhelm him. We need his cooperation to dig deeper into the family history, to find out who else might have been involved." Sarah nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "We need to meet him, explain the situation, see if he knows anything that might help us." As they planned their approach, Sarah's phone buzzed with a new message. It was from an old contact in the police department, someone who had been following the case closely. The message was short but sent a jolt through her system. Possible witness coming forward. Claims to have seen Emma after her disappearance. Need to talk. The timing was uncanny, almost too perfect. Could this be the breakthrough they needed, another piece falling into place just as the genetic puzzle was unraveling? As Sarah and Alex prepared to meet the uncle, the sense of urgency intensified. The walls were closing in on a truth that had remained elusive for 2 decades. Every step, every conversation, every piece of information was a thread, pulling them closer to unraveling the mystery. The meeting with the uncle was set for the next day, and as night fell, Sarah found herself unable to sleep. She replayed the day's events over and over, her mind a whirlwind of anticipation and dread. The following morning, they stood outside a modest suburban home, the kind that spoke of quiet lives and unspoken stories. Alex knocked on the door, and after a moment, it opened to reveal a man in his 60s, his expression one of curiosity and mild apprehension. "Mr. Harrison," Alex began, introducing themselves and explaining their purpose. As they delved into the sensitive topic, Sarah watched the man's face closely, searching for any flicker of recognition or emotion. Mr. Harrison listened intently, his brow furrowing with concentration. "I had no idea," he said finally, his voice thick with a mixture of surprise and sorrow. "I never knew my brother had a daughter. But if there's anything I can do to help..." As they discussed the family history, a new lead emerged, a name, another relative who had been estranged from the family for years. The excitement was palpable, but so was the tension. Each revelation brought them closer to the truth, but also closer to the potential for heartbreak. As they left the meeting, Sarah's phone buzzed again. Another message from her police contact. "Witness ready to talk. Urgent." The pieces were coming together, the picture slowly forming out of the shadows. But with every answer, new questions arose, and as they drove to meet the witness, Sarah couldn't shake the feeling that they were on the brink of uncovering something much bigger than a single missing person case. Something that could change everything they thought they knew. As the car sped towards the next destination, the suspense was palpable. The truth was out there, waiting to be discovered, and with it, the promise of justice and the hope of bringing Emma home. The morning sun cast a golden hue across the windshield as they drove, a stark contrast to the storm brewing in their minds. Sarah checked her phone once more, the message from her contact echoing in her thoughts. "Witness ready to talk. Urgent." The urgency of those words thrummed in her veins like a pulse. They arrived at the designated meeting spot, a quiet cafe tucked away in a corner of the city that seemed to have forgotten the passage of time. The air was thick with the aroma of freshly brewed coffee. As they entered, Sarah scanned the room, her eyes landing on a figure seated at a table in the corner, a man in his late 40s, his face etched with lines that spoke of a past filled with secrets. He greeted them with a nod, his eyes wary but determined. "I'm Greg," he introduced himself, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had been waiting a long time to speak. "I knew Emma back then. We were close." Sarah and Alex exchanged a glance, the anticipation between them almost tangible. Greg leaned forward, lowering his voice. "There's something I should have said years ago. I saw her that day, the day she disappeared. She was with someone. A man. I didn't think much of it until now." The confession hung in the air, thick with unspoken implications. "Who was he?" Alex pressed gently, careful not to break the fragile trust that had formed. Greg hesitated, his eyes flickering with the struggle of memories long buried. "I didn't know his name, but I've seen him since. Around town. He was always there, just on the edge of things. Watching." The room seemed to close in as Sarah processed this new information. "Do you remember anything else about him?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "His eyes," Greg replied, a shiver running through him. "Cold, like he was always calculating, always a step ahead of everyone." As the conversation continued, Greg provided more details. A scar on the man's left hand, the particular way he walked, slightly favoring his right leg. Each piece of information was a thread, and Sarah could feel them weaving together a tapestry of truth. Leaving the cafe, they were filled with a renewed sense of determination. "We need to dig into local records," Alex suggested. "Find out who fits this description." Back at their makeshift headquarters, the search began in earnest. Hours turned into a blur of names, faces, and documents. They followed every lead, every whisper of a connection that might unravel the mystery. And then, like a revelation, it happened. A name stood out, one that matched the description Greg had given. A man who had lived in the area for years, his life seemingly unremarkable, yet always skirting the periphery of the investigation. It was a name that linked back to Mr. Harrison's estranged relative, an uncle with a shadowy past. Sarah felt her heart skip as the pieces clicked into place. The suspect was a man who had managed to blend seamlessly into the fabric of the community, his true nature hidden beneath layers of normalcy. The killer in plain sight, lurking just beneath the surface of their everyday lives. But there was still more to uncover, more threads to pull, until the entire truth lay bare. As they prepared to confront this new suspect, the weight of the moment settled over them. The tension was electric, the promise of answers just within reach, The door to the truth was opening, and on the other side lay the possibility of justice for Emma, a chance to bring her home at last. The suspense was almost unbearable, and the next move could change everything. In the dimly lit room, the air was thick with anticipation. They stood around the table, eyes fixed on the documents spread before them. It was a fragile mosaic, each piece a fragment of a life hidden in plain sight. Sarah took a deep breath, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "We need to make sure we're not jumping to conclusions. Let's double-check everything." Alex nodded, his fingers tapping rapidly on the keyboard as he cross-referenced the information. The clattering of keys filled the room, punctuated by the occasional rustle of paper. They were searching for any discrepancies, any detail that could either solidify their theory or unravel it entirely. Time seemed to warp, each second stretching into eternity. And then Alex's voice cut through the silence, a note of triumph in his tone. "The scar. It's mentioned in a police report from years ago. A bar fight. The guy got cut pretty bad." Sarah leaned in, her eyes scanning the screen. The report was old, filed away and forgotten, much like the man they were now pursuing. But there it was, a description that matched Greg's account perfectly. "This is it. This is the breakthrough we've been waiting for." They exchanged a look, a mix of disbelief and hope. Yet there was still an unease, a gnawing fear that they could be wrong, that they could be chasing shadows. "We need more than just a scar," Sarah pressed, her mind racing. "We need to place him at the scene, connect him to Emma." That's when Alex had an idea. "The databases. We can check DNA, see if there's any familial link to Emma. This uncle, if he's related, we might just have our smoking gun." It was a long shot, but it was the best lead they had. They quickly contacted the lab, requesting a comparison of DNA samples. The process would take time, and every moment felt like an eternity. In the interim, they dug deeper into the suspect's past. They traced his movements, interviewed neighbors, and pieced together a timeline. Each detail added another layer to the story, painting a picture of a man who had lived on the fringes, always one step ahead, always just out of reach. Days passed in a blur of activity, and then the call came. The DNA results were in. As Sarah listened to the voice on the other end, her heart pounded in her chest. "It's a match." The words echoed in the room, rippling through the silence. It was the confirmation they needed, the final piece of the puzzle that placed the suspect not just in Emma's life, but in the very heart of her disappearance. The breakthrough was complete, and the truth was now undeniable. They had found their killer in plain sight, a man who had hidden behind the facade of normalcy for 2 long decades. But as they prepared to take the next step, a question lingered, casting a shadow over their victory. What had driven this man to commit such a heinous act? And would he confess now that the walls were closing in around him? The answers lay just beyond the horizon, waiting to be uncovered. And as they moved forward, the promise of resolution hung heavy in the air, a testament to their relentless pursuit of justice for Emma. The DNA match was the final key to the complex lock that had held Emma's disappearance as an unsolved mystery for 2 decades. With the confirmation in hand, Sarah and her team gathered in a dimly lit conference room, the weight of their accomplishment tempered by the somber reality of what it revealed. The suspect, known to the world as Richard Lawson, was a respected figure in their community. He was a retired teacher, a man who had spent his life educating and nurturing young minds. To his neighbors, he was the quiet, friendly presence who always had a smile and a kind word. He volunteered at the local soup kitchen and was a deacon at the church. His public persona was one of integrity and compassion, yet behind the affable exterior lay a dark and troubling secret. Richard had been living a double life, masterfully concealing his sinister inclinations beneath a cloak of normalcy. The DNA evidence placed him directly at the scene of Emma's disappearance, and his meticulously crafted facade began to crumble under the weight of undeniable truth. As the team prepared to execute the arrest, they couldn't help but reflect on the chilling dichotomy of Richard's existence. How could someone so seemingly ordinary, someone who had been a part of their very fabric of life, harbor such malevolence? They moved quickly, coordinating with local authorities to ensure the arrest was executed with precision. Richard was at home, tending to his garden, a serene image that belied the storm about to engulf him. The officers approached with care, their presence a stark contrast to the peaceful setting. As they read him his rights, Richard's demeanor changed. The jovial mask slipped away, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. He offered no resistance, no denial. Instead, he stood silently, as if resigned to the inevitable conclusion of a life lived in shadows. The news of Richard's arrest spread rapidly, sending shockwaves through the community. People who had once trusted and revered him now grappled with the betrayal that stained their memories. The church congregation was in disbelief, struggling to reconcile the benevolent figure they had known with the monstrous actions he was accused of. In the interrogation room, Richard sat across from Sarah, the air thick with tension. She met his gaze, searching for a flicker of remorse, a hint of the truth that had eluded them for so long. "Why, Richard?" Her voice was steady, yet there was an undercurrent of urgency. He remained silent, his eyes betraying nothing. But there was a shift, a subtle crack in his armor. The truth was there, lurking just beneath the surface, and Sarah was determined to unearth it. As the hours stretched into the night, Richard finally spoke, his voice a whisper that carried the weight of his secrets. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he murmured, the words hanging in the air like a confession. The team listened intently, each word a piece of the puzzle that had haunted them all. The story was far from over, and the full extent of Richard's actions had yet to be revealed, but they were closer now, closer than they had ever been, to understanding the twisted motivations that had shattered so many lives. As they prepared to delve deeper into Richard's confession, there was a renewed sense of purpose. The promise of resolution was no longer just a distant hope. It was within their grasp, a testament to their unwavering commitment to justice for Emma and all who had suffered in silence. In the sterile confines of the interrogation room, Sarah leaned forward, a quiet determination in her eyes. Richard's whispered words hung between them like a fragile thread connecting past and present. "It wasn't supposed to be like this," he repeated, his voice cracking under the weight of years spent in deceit. "What was it supposed to be, Richard?" Sarah pressed gently, coaxing the truth from the shadows. Richard's gaze drifted to the floor, his expression a mix of regret and resignation. "Emma, she trusted me. I was supposed to guide her, protect her. But I failed." The room was silent, save for the soft hum of the overhead lights. Richard's confession was a slow unraveling, years of guilt spilling forth in halting admissions. He spoke of manipulation, of a twisted desire to control, of moments where he could have chosen a different path but didn't. As the details of Emma's last day came to light, a clearer picture emerged. Richard had taken advantage of her vulnerability, luring her away under the guise of mentorship. The betrayal was profound, a violation that shattered the innocence of not just Emma, but an entire community. The interrogation continued into the early hours, each revelation a painful reminder of the lives altered by Richard's actions. Yet, as the truth came to light, there was also a sense of closure, a long-awaited end to the questions that had haunted so many. With the confession secured, the legal process moved swiftly. The community, once reeling from shock, now rallied together, determined to see justice served. The trial was a somber affair, a public reckoning that laid bare the duality of Richard's life. Witness after witness took the stand, painting a portrait of a man who had lived a double life, his benevolence masking a darker reality. The prosecution was relentless, weaving a narrative of deceit and betrayal that left little doubt of Richard's guilt. The jury's verdict was unanimous: guilty. The sentence, life without parole, was a relief to many, a tangible acknowledgement of the pain endured by Emma's family and friends. As the gavel fell, there was a collective exhale, a release of tension that had gripped the community for 2 decades. Outside the courthouse, Emma's family stood together, their faces a mixture of relief and sorrow. The justice they had sought was finally theirs, but it was bittersweet, a reminder of the daughter, sister, and friend who would never return. In the weeks that followed, the community began to heal. The church, once Richard's domain, became a place of remembrance and reflection. A memorial was erected in Emma's honor, a symbol of resilience and the enduring power of truth. For Sarah, the resolution of Emma's case was both a professional triumph and a personal journey. As she sat at her desk, reviewing the final report, she reflected on the intricacies of memory and justice. In the end, she knew it was the persistence of those who refused to forget that had brought Emma's story full circle. It was a testament to the strength of a community unwilling to let the darkness overshadow the light. As the screen fades to black, a quote appears. "Justice may sleep, but it never dies. The truth is always waiting to be found."